Hello everybody, welcome to Scorched Earth Toys at anymoon.com's review of Arcadia's 160 scale VF-0D toys. This is the toy that was released in February 2015 for 36,800 yen. Now you might be looking at it thinking your video's color is off, and it is not. That is the toy's color that it was produced in. If you're really familiar with Macross Zero, you probably expected it to be a slightly more gray shade of blue. It isn't the exact same blue as, say, a Michael VF-25G from Bandai. It isn't the same blue as, say, a Yamato VF-19S toy. It is a little bit more gray than that, but clearly not as gray as most people expected. Same with the white underneath the toy. Most people would have expected it to be a little more gray. It is not. So, is the toy good enough where, despite the color issues, you should purchase it? Let's take a closer look. The Arcadia toy is 31 centimeters long in fighter mode. That is exactly the same as the Yamato VF-0 toy, which you would expect since they're both 160 scale. The Yamato VF-0 toy, though, cost less than half the MSRP of the Arcadia toy. So what are the differences? First and foremost, if I put my finger underneath the Yamato toy, you can see that it kind of humps forward. Now, this is the latest VF-0 toy that Yamato released, so it's the most improved, and it's still floppy like that. On the Arcadia toy, I can lift it up entirely with a finger, and there is nothing slumping. So, much more solid toy. The Yamato toy, you could also see, has a gap that runs through here, some larger gaps back here, and some fatter panel lines. On the Arcadia toy, no gaps really whatsoever, and very tight panel lines. Now, some people like their panel lines a little thicker. That's maybe a personal preference thing. On the Arcadia toy, or on the Yamato toy I should say, this just slides. And my landing gear also wobbles around. On my Arcadia toy, this doesn't budge. And the landing gears are locked into position. I can pull them inward as part of pulling them out, but they aren't going anywhere. So, improved there. Also improved are the pilot figures. There are two in the Arcadia figure. You can check out anymoon.com for more pictures. But you can see Roy, who is definitely taller than Shin. His pilot figure would completely engulf. It makes Shin look like a child. So the Yamato figures were a little bit bulbous. I don't know how much that matters to you, especially when we're talking about hundreds of dollars more expensive. So, the Arcadia toy, much more solid, much better looking, but otherwise the same features that we've come to expect on all of our premium fighter toys. Rubber wheels, articulated tow bars, everything's integrated, tucks away nicely if you want it to. You could fit the gun in fighter mode. I will show you the gun in just a moment. The problem I have with the Arcadia toy, in fighter mode at least, is nothing really locks into its proper position. So in handling it, you can get everything kind of jostled, and then you would need to spend some time getting it to look right. Now everything, obviously, stiff enough where if you're not bumping into it, is going to stay in position. This thing is rock solid. Well, the pitot tube spun a little bit on me. But otherwise, that is kind of an annoying thing to be able to so easily bump things out of place. And you already seen the opening canopy. There is also an air brake. And then what kind of sums up the differences between the two toys. The air brake here. Nice detail. The Yamato toy also has an air brake. Has just a little bit less detail on it. So, Arcadia, definitely a much better toy, but still, it's not the generation jump you saw from like the version 1 160 VF1 toys and then the version 2. These are definitely similar, more similar than those toys were. One little pet peeve, if I put these landing gears away, everything is so flush and so nice, and it's very nice, until you want to pull that landing gear back out. There's nowhere to like slip in a fingernail, so plan on growing your fingernails out a little bit, because that can be a little challenging. But as far as pet peeves go, that one would be tiny, since it does look so good when everything's nice and closed up. These toys are different enough that as you handle them, you don't really think that maybe the Arcadia is just a slight remold of the Yamato toy. It really does feel like a completely different toy, which justifies some of that expense. The one place where that's not the case is the guns. The Yamato gun, in gray up above, appears to be exactly the same as the Arcadia gun, except for the color and the little metal spangly detail to it. With one exception, and that is the grip of the gun. Yamato had a little circle peg in their hands. Arcadia has a little square peg. The Arcadia handle also is very stiff. Takes a little bit of effort to collapse, and it really clicks into place. Whereas the Yamato gun very easily tucked back in. It didn't really click into place. And so that was kind of frustrating when holding it in Gearwalk or Batchroid modes. Alright, here is a quick line art comparison, courtesy of the Macross Mecha Manual. As you can see, very, very good approximation of the line art, which is probably unobtainable in a transformable toy. So no complaints here. Inside the box, you will get 2 sets of armaments for the wings, these micro-missile ejectors and this missile. They look good on the plane, but the plane does have another set of hard points and no weapon to go on it. So some people have cried foul about that, saying the toy should come with more weapons. But then the question is, how many weapons were shown on the plane in the show? So things to consider. Also, the gun points a little bit downward. Not a huge deal, but we are suspending an arm and a leg. It'd be nice to have it go perfectly straight. You do have the removable intake covers. They have a design that's pretty nice. There's a little circular area for the tip of the turbine, a little peg underneath. It works really well. Goes on incredibly easily, and it's a little bit easier to fish out than some of the other Valkyrie toys that have come out. I mentioned how nice and small the pilot figures are, but that also makes the pilots jostle around quite easily in their seats. It's not been bad enough where I found the pilot's butt is facing me at any point, but that can be a little bit of a bummer. Alright, let's continue on and check out Gearwalk mode. Here is Gearwalk mode, and true to my standard, I do have a separate video outlining transformation, so definitely check that out. Once you get here, there's nothing really to complain about. The toy is rock solid in Gearwalk mode. You could flip the wings out if that is your preference, or tuck them over like I have done. You can see the front canards fold down and out of the way, and this is a fully functional Gearwalk mode. With all the articulation that you could desire from a Gearwalk mode toy. It stays together very solidly. The legs sweep forward far enough to look aggressive. If you have a Yamato VF-19 toy, these ankle joints will look very familiar to you, and that is not a good thing. But so far mine are incredibly stiff, so I've got very little concern. And also just the weight balance on the VF-0 is much better than it is on the VF-19 Gearwalk mode. So everything seems to be holding up just fine. It is playable as well as beautiful. in this mode. The gun stays in the hand incredibly well, which was kind of a pet peeve sometimes with the Yamato toy. Everything is going just fine right there. So, strong marks for gear walk mode. Here we are in Batroid mode. Now, I've mentioned this is an expensive toy. You might be wondering, is there a lot of metal in this toy? And the answer to that is yes, but it's metal you wouldn't notice necessarily. It's in the joints where I often say it should be. So that's not a complaint, but an observation for those of you who want a super heavy toy that feels like it's made of metal. This is not that. It feels like it's made of very high quality plastic with metal joints, which again is what I think you want in a toy. Now, there are some issues with durability though, despite the metal joints. There are scratches on this toy aplenty already. Here you can see right in front of that tab there is a scratch. Very common that there will be scratches around the intakes. Let's see if I can find them for you. So there is a scratch right there in the blue paint. So a lot of sharp edges here, a lot of blue paint. The sharp edge passes by that blue paint during transformation, and what you end up with is a scratch. So if you own some Bandai DX Renewal toys and you are getting used to scratched paint, maybe that's not a big deal for you. For those of you who spend a ton of money on this toy, you should be very, very wary during transformation because it is very easy to scratch paint off. Also, those sharp edges can very easily be blunted if the toy were to take a fall on you in some way, shape, or form. So that is another durability concern over the long term. I also had a special little issue that fortunately I haven't heard of anyone else having, in that this leg fell off entirely when I went to pitch the legs outward. So be careful with that, although I don't know how I would have done anything special. I was able to take the leg apart, reattach the ball joint, but there's now a larger seam in the front and I can't really do anything about it, so that's a bummer, obviously, on such an expensive toy. I mentioned earlier, and you might have seen in my gear walk video, there's nothing that really holds things in place on this toy when they're in their proper position, so again, when handling it, you might knock a tail fin out on the leg. One other thing that I'm not too keen on, while I'm griping about very minor issues for the most part, is the mechanism that holds the hips in. It's not very stiff. So right there I was able to pull it out incredibly easily. Fortunately it's easy to tuck back in. I just wish it held a little tighter. Okay, here we have the Arcadia VF-0D, the Yamato VF-0S transformed into Batroid modes for comparison purposes. And what you can see is that on the Yamato the chest is much wider. This is very similar to what happened with Yamato when they went from their 148 VF1 to their 160 V2 toys. They slimmed up the chest on that. The proportions, I think, on the VF-0D look a lot better in the chest area than they do on the VF-0S. Although, alternatively, I could see where the broader chest does make it look a little beefier. So that's up to you. Again, you can see the thicker lines that run across the Yamato toy versus the Arcadia toy. The Arcadia toy looks very sharp. That blue paint scheme, again, to draw a comparison here and also to give you some size references. Now that Yamato VF-0S is about the same size as the VF-0D from Arcadia, as one would expect. Those toys being roughly 25.5 centimeters. Here are Yamato's VF-19S and Bandai DX Renewal VF-25G. Again, you can see the different blues, and you can see kind of how the VF-0D kind of lines up with those. Just a little bit taller, not a huge height advantage, but it certainly looks good. Alright, let's put this toy through its paces articulation-wise. The head is actually a ball joint. You have a little bit of rock back and forth. Not very much, all things considered. You got your up motion, your down motion, your left And you're right. Not a huge range of motion, but pretty much all you need. And remember, you've got these giant chest obstacles in the way, so certain poses, it's probably going to look like it would be staring at its chest. So not the best in the world, but decent enough. And again, you can pivot the head laser, as you would have seen in the transformation guide, as that is very necessary. The shoulders all the way around, of course. And there's a little hinge on the inside, so you can bring the shoulder in like that, or back out again. You can't really pivot it too far back out that way. Unlike the Yamato toys, these are very stiff. There's little shoulder plates, so they should stay right where you want them. There's a swivel right underneath, so that swivel's right here. And then you have your elbow joint, which has a pretty decent range of motion. Now you theoretically could bring that out. That might help the range of motion just a little bit, but kind of up to you on that. So then you have your fists, which rotate at the wrist. There is a wrist pivot. You have 3 fingers, 2 articulated, the pinky articulated separately. Then you have your trigger finger and your thumb. And then again, I mentioned earlier, there's a little square peg that helps hold the gun in place. There is no waist on the toy. There's no sort of back joint. You could see the wings are directly behind the hips. So that's going to encumber your leg motion. Just spinning the toy around here. So what you have to do if you want to bring the legs forward is either disconnect the back to give yourself a little bit more room, or you can just use your gear walk joint. Now the gear walk joints on this toy are beyond stiff. They are ridiculous. So you got that for your gear walk joint. That lets you bring the leg forward, as you can see. And then you have your knee and the twist at the knee. Now you get down to the leg. You can bring this thing all the way out, and then you have a full ball joint there with front, back, side to side, all very nice stuff. And again, incredibly stiff joints. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this gear walk joint back if I can. Very, very tight. Now what I didn't spend a lot of time on was the part where the leg fell off earlier. So you can sweep the legs outward like so. And that's not a bad, not really a bad range of motion, but you can also pull them out to a further point and sweep them out even further, which is a pretty nice gimmick. At 36,800 yen, I really thought Arcadia was going to solve one problem I had with the Yamato design, and that was the pitot tube. In Batroid mode, it's easier just to remove this pitot tube than it is to deal with it. You can watch my transformation video, I kind of comment on it, but this tube is supposed to be plugged into this little screw hole in the back, and you angle it out of the way, but you can see where you angle it, it goes right over the waist connector for the legs. So you have to twist it a few times, and it just seems like they could have come up with something like recessing that pitot tube, or just any sort of solution that didn't involve pulling it off, twisting it around, whatever else we have to do. So we're officially at that insane price point where there should be better design elements. One other thing, they got rid of the rotating seat. That was a gimmick on the Yamato toy when you transformed to Batroid. Right now my little pilot figures are pointing straight down. You can't notice that because of the heat shield, so I always thought it was a gratuitous and useless gimmick on Yamato's toys. I'm only mentioning this for the one person out there who cares. I certainly do not, but I do care about that pitot tube, so a little bit of a bummer there. At 36,800 yen, this is a very, very expensive toy, relegated to only the most die-hard Macross collectors and Macross Zero fans and VF-0D fans. I personally think I will find the VF-0S and VF-0A toys Arcadia is making more enjoyable than the 0D. Mostly because you don't get these little fins, and the tail fins are on the backpack, so hopefully they'll lock into place, and the overall toy will feel a little less fidgety. Maybe also the paint schemes will be less prone to scraping, so I'm kind of hoping for that. I am not at all sad I purchased this, and that's, I think, high praise considering a leg fell off on me. But I would say there are definitely better bang for your buck toys out there, so I would limit this to, again, die-hard Macross collectors with a gob of disposable income. One thing to consider, though, if you are on the fence about buying this toy, buy it. It will probably disappear, and no one is fighting for the Macross Zero rights. So chances are it's not going to be re-released anytime soon, probably for a few years. And no other company is going to come up with some sort of renewal VF-0D toy. So this is it. If you want it, get it. Otherwise, plan on spending more for it. Well, it's hard to imagine that a toy that costs this much could go up all that much in value. We see it time and time again with Macross collectibles, so consider that. Alright, thanks for viewing. Check out anymoon.com for my full article.